once again, hope this finds you well as always, and here's the latest update on what we've been up to. The first quick job that came in this afternoon is a very quick request from Chris Kelly. This piece of metal here is an adapter that will go into a fire hose fitting. For some reason, I'm sure somebody who's familiar with fire hose fittings will be able to tell me exactly what the problem is. For some reason, it was slightly oversized on the fittings we use. So Chris wanted the outside here skimming down to size. It's not a big job, you'd think, not a major one. Why am I showing you this even? Well, I just thought it would be interesting to have a look at this, because it shows the 4-jaw chuck. Now, I'm using a 4-jaw here for several reasons, one of which boils down to simple idleness. I couldn't be bothered to take it off the machine and put a 3-jaw up. But the others, first of all, the fitting in this region is quite thin-walled, and if I clamp it in the 4-jaw, I'm distributing the clamping force over 4 points rather than 3, so the chances of the fitting collapsing are far reduced. The second, if you can just get in here and see a bit better, this fitting actually has 12 sides on that. Well, I understand it's called a dodecahedron, and I'm probably wrong at that, but never mind. Anyway, there's 12 faces there. I could hold that in a 3-jaw, and it would just about work. On the other hand, because it'll divide by 4, it's very easy to hold it in the 4-jaw. So just to show that you sometimes use these things for some reasons that aren't immediately obvious, and as I said, admittedly one of them in this case is idleness. So there we go, that's another quick job that's been in and out, and yep, is the fitting, well, it isn't the fitting in question, but it's our fitting in question that will fit over it. These two nodges here are usually spring-loaded, so they push in. If we sway that off, you'll see inside there's 2 dogs. They will push in and engage in that groove there. So that's just another quick little job that's just come in from Chef of the Boiler Shop. You've heard of Clancy of the Overflow? Well, we've got a Chef of the Boiler Shop. Now, another quick job that's come up, we've got this. Now, this is a copy of one of these, which in turn is the vacuum piston out of Eric Tracy's brake valve. The problem with it is that spindle, you may just about to be able to see it, the spindle I'm holding has a bend in it. We can't easily straighten it without breaking it, so we're making a new one. The way this thing works is, if you look at an LMS or Dealey pattern as they're known, brake valve, yes, you can clearly see the bend in that now I look at it. This piston this is acted on by the vacuum system on the locomotive. When the brake is applied, the piston would sit roughly as I'm holding, air is admitted onto the side of the piston where my hand is, and the atmospheric pressure would force the piston forward. Little rant here, speaking as a scientist and somebody who masqueraded as a scientist for quite a few years, it is the atmospheric pressure that pushes it forward, not the vacuum pressure that sucks it in. Little rant over, thank you. Feel much better now, thanks for asking. Anyway, in the slot in the end, there's a lever that sits vertically. That lever then in turn connects to a piston below it, that in turn controls the steam supply to the loco steam brake. So you close the vacuum, and that then in turn would you would destroy the vacuum, and that then in turn would apply the steam brakes, or release the steam brakes even, on the locomotive. So what we've got here is a brand new one from a casting, and we're doing it on the little Myford for several reasons. First of all, other lathes were busy with other jobs, and second, this thing here has a counterbore machined into the body of the piston. Because I'm going to need to skim that outer surface and this surface to finish size, I don't want to hold it on either of those because I'll leave horrible chuck marks all over it. I decide to hold it on the inside of the counterbore. So I've got these jaws here that I've opened up into that counterbore to grip it perfectly securely. The reason it's on the little Myford is that was the only machine that had a chuck small enough which would actually grip it. The 3-jaw chuck for the Harrison, the jaws are so big they won't actually fit into that counterbore. So got it all set up. What I've been doing here is I've been trimming this spindle here to length. It was over length. Well, this was supplied as a raw casting. It was rough machined, and I'm now starting to finish machine it. However, if I want to machine the end of that spindle there, if I'm only holding it in the chuck here, as soon as I put a tool anywhere near that end or even think of taking a cut, you can bet your proverbials, because of this great length and leverage you've got here, it will dig in, pull out the chuck, and you'll have a very significant emotional event. So instead, I'm using this beast here, which is a steady. Very simple piece of kit. It basically bolts to the lathe bed. It's got 3 bronze fingers in it here, here, and here that are adjusted so they run on the work. Good practices before you start that work spinning is give it a good dose of oil just so it won't rub and overheat and mar the work there. And then what I've done using this tool is, first of all, I've faced that end parallel and I've also faced it so that spindle's the right length. I've then brought in a centre drill in the tailstock and put a centre drill hole in there. That then means I can then set it up next to the live centre in here, and we can turn it between centres, turn that spindle to size, turn that to finish size. And then the last thing to do is, if you look closely, you'll see the end of that hole, the end of the spindle on the old one is tapped for a nut that goes in there, which in turn holds what we call the bullet, which is a little steel rod that then in turn pushes that lever into place. Well, that will be tapped for that to go in. That'll be the last job, and then it can all be refitted. Apart from the bend, this old piston is actually in pretty good shape, so we can copy all the dimensions off it without any problems. So there's another little job. And then the last one, that's another one that's come in. Well, we saw this last week. It's the bush for Eric. As you saw it last week, I was in the process of machining it. I've just beaten the remains of the core out of it. Well, it's now finished machined. It's turned to size. It's got a lovely radius on the... Well, this is actually the inside end of the bush here. This would sit against a radius on the crank pin. And then you would have the intermediate bush sitting beyond it. And that's done and ready to go. However, one rod bush does not make a complete Black 5 motion set make. There's a few bits that are missing. The first of all, it needs a key to go into that keyway, like one of these. That key, incidentally, has just fallen on the floor because it obviously likes life down there. Let's retrieve that. That key is actually a bit of nice little recycling as well. When I was hunting around for a piece of suitable steel, all I needed was a piece of square section, mild steel, suitable to use. What I actually ended up using was, when I had a vigorous rummage in the various scrap bins and whatnot, I actually found the shank of a piece of redundant lathe tooling, brazed carbide tooling. It had been ground and ground so many times there was next to no carbide left on the end of it. And so when that went through a milling machine, we ended up with a piece of steel, a suitable key. Because I'm old-fashioned and I like doing things the proper way, it's then had the ends filed round here, so it fits nicely into the keyway. So that's good and ready to go. That bit's done. We've also got a thrust ring. This is the old thrust ring. It'll go again. What we will do is press the bush into the rod, and then we will then heat the thrust ring so it expands, and then drop it over the end of the bush, let it shrink into place, a bit like fitting a tyre. The last thing is an oil pad, which will go in this hole here. And here it is, ladies and gentlemen, floating in this jar of oil, a bit like a rather unpleasant looking pickled onion. I want to see if I can fish it out. Let's see if we can grab it. It doesn't want to... There we go. There's the little blighter. So what that is that's a piece of felt, which has then been stuck into that jam tin full of oil to gently soak for a while. It's actually been in there since last Friday. The felt we use comes in sheet form, like this, and you can see there's a hole in it, which strangely exactly matches that oil pad. You then use a hole saw to cut a suitable oil pad out of that material, and then pickle it in oil for ideally at least a week, because it gives the oil plenty of time to soak through. That pad will then act as an oil restrictor so that the oil reservoir doesn't drain instantly, and it also acts to distribute the oil a bit around the bush. Sometimes you'll see a rectangular pad, sometimes round. It really depends, I think, on what the designer's ideas were that day. And then the last job we've got in at the moment is actually blowing the dust off one that was actually started 18 months ago. Eric Tracy, once more. We found it needed a new set of tender and locomotive drawbar pins. This is one of the old pins. As you can see, it looks a bit scabby, and there's also, get the light in the right place, you can also see there's quite an impressive delve in it. So two of these were actually, it's why they're a bit rusty, they were actually turned about January last year, and then they sat quietly in a corner here, quietly gathering dust, and it's now time to drag them out and get them finished. So they are turned to size and length. The last things they need doing is they need a tapping, putting into the head like this one. That's so you can screw an eye bolt in to get them in and out as required. And they also, if you look at this pin here, you will see on the pin there's the remains. Andrew was very pleased this pin wasn't going to go again because he didn't have to beat the remains of the split pin out. There's a split pin go through it as well. There's also a load of junk on the floor that's just fallen over. There's a split pin to go through it, which vertically retains this pin. I mean, of course, this pin's upside down. That would normally be the top. It's just been sat on the bench there. And so that's what we've got, and that's where we're up to. Those will be going in after Easter. We're hoping to have Eric with the local intender reunited, ideally towards the end of next week. And then at some stage in the not-too-distant future, we'll be steaming her for the first time in about 12, 14 months. And then that'll be another engine back in the fleet, ready to go. So, as always, folks, I hope you found it interesting and informative. That's what we've got, and that's where we're up to. Have a good Easter, one and all. Take care, and I'll see you around.